Hey everyone, today I'll be trying out the G-Pen and Maru Pen, common tools for professional mangaka within my inking process. So here's what I'll be using: the pen holder, G-Pen nibs, brand new out of the box. This is commonly used by mangaka for inking as it's more expressive with line variation than a typical pen. The Maru pen is now used to ink finer details, but still also has some line width variation. And finally, in working with dip pens, I'll be using the Leader Manga ink. It's an ink that I started using as it dries a little faster than other dip inks. You can find all of these materials on Amazon, linked below, or some other art supply stores. Now that I have my materials, I'll test it out. When using dip pens, you always want some scrap paper to test out the lines before moving on to inking to make sure you have proper control over your lines. This scrap paper already has some lines I tested with my micron pens, which I'll upload in a later video. But as you can see, technical pens have consistent line widths, which is good for when you want to make straight lines. After testing a fresh nib, the nib won't dispatch the ink as there is a protective factory coating to prevent rusting before use. But to actually draw, you need to remove that layer by either running it through a match for a couple of seconds or rubbing with alcohol. After preparing the nib, it finally works. In operating, you always need to have the concave side of the nib pressed on the paper to release the ink. The lines vary by the pressure you put on it, as the opening of the nib is flexible, changing the width of the line released. Line art tends to have more emphasis when the line widths are varied. In inking, there are a couple of options like brushes and brush pens that I'll go over in a later video, but the G and Maru pens provide a little more control than more sensitive brushes and more variation than technical pens. But when it comes to making straight and even lines, a technical pen is more advised as G-pens are better for curved and more dynamic lines. The cool thing about G-pens is that while you can achieve higher line width for big lines, you can also have faint strokes to get fine details, which is good for changing line density and frequency and adding hatching and stippling for pen and ink shading. Before testing out the Maru pen, after each use, to keep a good nib, I'm cleaning my nib with a paper towel soaked with rubbing alcohol to make sure any dried ink doesn't affect any future inking. Now moving on to a Maru pen demo, the Maru nib is good for even finer details than the G-Pen, with line variation to a lesser extent. So getting those really intricate details is really good with the Maru pen. Now that my hands and nibs are warmed up and good to go, I can switch over to inking my manga. Dip, dip, dip. When using nib pens, you definitely have to watch out for more smudges than a technical pen, so putting a scrap paper where your hand can go is really helpful, at least for me. At the same time, when using some inks, you should make sure the area is fully dry before you move around a different area of the drawing, which can make things a little slower. I've noticed my line art pops a little more with pretty quick strokes to make really beautiful lines. With technical pens, sometimes I have to go over the same line to make it thicker, but gaining more control of the G-Pen allows that one big stroke to get it all done in one go. Apologies for the shaky camera. I have to make sure my setup doesn't vibrate as I hatch, but I was definitely getting locked in as I was drawing and moving a little bit more free. For this panel, I'm drawing my main character for my one shot waking up in the morning. I wanted to try to make a lot of surreal images, so I have all of these hands surrounding him as he wakes up, almost weighing his eyes down as they slowly open. In the one shot I'm working on right now, I want to try to make a lot of mundane, everyday things really dramatic and heavy. So I'm taking a lot of inspiration from some of my favorite manga like Trail of Blood and Chainsaw Man, and trying to apply things I like. Hands are still a struggle for me, but I want to get better as they're a really expressive part of the body aside from the face. After inking in the hands, I'm just going to hatch the face, adding a really dramatic shadow with just vertical lines. I like the quick strokes and the sounds that G-pens provide over tentacle pens, and I can really achieve fine lines to layer in more hatches. I started out hatching with the G-Pen but wanted an even more thin line, so I switched to the Maru Pen. With most rendering with pen and ink, the more you build up those gradients and values, the better your picture looks with more depth. But overall, I find it really meditative to build up the shadows of the picture. As I finish up, I want to say that you don't need these pens or any other fancy arts applied to be a mangaka. They're just additional tools to try out new effects and techniques with. To finish off, I'm just going to go over the big areas to add black with Sharpie and finish off the panel. For more advanced artists who want to add more depth and variation in their lines during the inking process, the G-Pen and Maru Pen work great for the budding mangaka. But it definitely requires a little more patience in using than the regular pen, as there's more considerations in preparation, technique, and maintenance. And with that, we wrap up our video. If you found this content helpful, please consider leaving a thumbs up below, and subscribe if you want to see more content about creating comics and manga. If you want to follow my other social media and work, the links are in the description. Finally, if you have any suggestions for future videos you'd like to see, please feel free to leave a comment below. I'll see you guys next time.